Right. Oh, well, we'll kick off then, shall we?
I'm here. Hello, Tom.
Very
excellent.
welcome.
Excellent.
Yes.
Very much welcome.
I had some
Very
problems
much
in
welcome.
connecting. I don't know what happens with
you had to, right, okay. I don't know what the problem was either. Sorry, I do apologize for that.
No, not at all. And I'm sorry to be late, because I also, following the suggestion of our president, I tried to connect 5 minutes in advance.
Oh, well then, your president better follow his own advice and let's get on. Well, on behalf of the Academy, I want to welcome you all. And maybe we have people from each continent, and I think by the end of, we soon will have during our meeting. So very much welcome from England, and I then now pass you to Virginia in Rome, and Virginia, perhaps you, as your custom, will you lead us in your impeccable Latin from Rome, the Veni Sancte Spiritus, please.
Yes. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus, et emitte celis lucis Tuae radium. Veni Pater Pauperum, veni Dator Munerum, veni Lumen Cordium. Consolator optime, dulcis hospes anime, dulce refrigerium. In labore requiem in esto temperie infletus solatium. O lux beatissima, reple cordis intima tuorum fidelium, sine tuo numine nihil est in nomine nihil est in oxium. Lava quod est sordidum, riga quod est aridum, sana quod est saucium. Flecte quod est rigidum, fove quod est frigidum, rege quod est devium. Da tuis fidelibus in te confidentibus, sacrum septenarium. Da virtutis meritum, da salutis exitum, da perenne gaudium. Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. So we'll go from Rome to Paris, to you, Jose Antonio, who very kindly agreed to chair our meeting, and on this light from Africa. And in order, just to illustrate how much I don't waste time, Jose Antonio, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wood. Well, good morning to some, good afternoon to others, and good night to the rest. Well, our main panelist today for this wonderful Conversazione will be Father Patrick Pullicino, Mr. Richard Kakeeto, and Mr. Greg Shea. And if Dr. Wahome Ngare is able to join, he will speak also. So I think the best is to allow our panelists to say what they have to, and after we open the floor for questions. And so I will introduce the panelists just before they speak. I think it's better. So our first panelist is Father Patrick Pullicino. When Mrs. Mary Lennon asked him his bio to introduce, he was so humble. He said, "Oh, just put that I am a neurologist and a recently ordained priest who spent his childhood until 15 years of age in East Africa and very much interested in this, but I think this is a little too short. He is indeed a neurologist, but more than that, he was a professor of clinical neuroscience and worked for the National Health Service in Great Britain for 20 years. He is a father of 6. So only when his beloved wife died, he became a priest, and that's why he is a young priest, very recently ordained. So he could share with us his experience in the last conference he attended on behalf of the Academy. Father, please.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to, because Greg and Richard really know all the background to all this conference much deeper than I do, I'm going to give you slightly a personal view of my experience at this conference, and then leave it up to Greg and Richard and Dr. Wahome to fill in the details, which they know much better than me and all the people concerned. But I was very, very pleased when Dr. Ward suggested that I could go to Africa to this conference, because, as Jose said, I spent my childhood in Africa, and I've been back once, and I always want a chance to go back again. And I'd never been to West Africa. So I got my yellow fever vaccine, and off I went on the plane. And it was very interesting, very colorful. What I remember too, one part of Africa is quite similar to another part in some ways. People are very kind, people are very welcoming, hospitality. But of course in Ghana, then it's West Africa, and there are quite a few differences then from East Africa. But particularly this conference. Now, maybe I can show you a few slides from a previous talk, just to give you a little bit of, so you don't have to keep looking at me all the time. Let's see, share. This is always the case of where I think this is it. No, that's not it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's coming.
This is it. I got it now. All right. So should I enlarge this for you?
Yes, it's fine.
So the 4th African Inter-Parliamentary Conference on Family, Sovereignty and Values, and it was held at the Parliament. And there you see the lovely conference center. And just to give you a little background from my point of view, about 20 out of the 54 countries in Africa were represented, and the conference was initially launched and hosted by Uganda in Entebbe for 3 years. And the conferences are a push by African lawmakers and civil organizations to defend traditional cultural identity, oppose external ideological influences, and assert regional sovereignty. And the core objectives were to protect the traditional African family structure, because they feel, there is a need to resist outside pressure to take up agendas that have been pushed by the West as new human rights, and Africans would like to promote African self-sufficiency in all areas, which is a wonderful thing. And the goal was that by coming together on core traditional and family values, African countries could form a bloc that is large enough in terms of population and resources to be able to veto any undesirable agenda that the West or East can try to force on them. And they're calling this modern colonialism. So that was really the whole background to it. And the goal of this particular meeting was to produce and adopt a charter at the end of 3 days. So I won't go into the actual talks, but what I would like to talk to you a little bit about is the Catholic side of, so I just go through these. That was the Bishop of, Archbishop of Kumasi. Here we go. So the Catholic facts about Africa, which I knew a little bit about, but I was quite surprised about the vibrancy of the African Catholic Church. So first of all, it must be said that the African Catholic bishops have shown themselves to be courageous and faithful to church teaching, and the only group that have, when they refused to compromise with the Vatican Declaration on the Blessing of Homosexuals Fiducia Supplicans in 2023. So about the statistics, 50% of Africans are Christian, 20% or 288 million of the world's Catholics live in Africa, and it is the fastest growing region for Catholicism globally. And African Catholics will shortly outnumber European, because the Europeans are going down and the Africans are going up at a very fast clip. 29 of 52 sub-Saharan countries have more than 20% Catholics. And the Catholicism is vibrant, increasing by 3.3% in a single year. I think that was a couple of years ago. And it is said that this is helped by high birth rates and youth engagement. And Africa has 1/3 of all seminarians in the world. And also an amazing statistics, half of all new Catholic baptisms are in Africa. There are 14% of the bishops are Africans. They're slightly underrepresented. And there are 4 countries have about 20 million or more Catholics. Democratic Republic of the Congo comes first, Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ghana has about 13% or 3 million. There are 400 million Muslims, but I heard and have read that there are many conversions occurring from Islam to Christianity, which you don't hear a lot about in Europe and in the West. So, at one point also I'd like to bring up now, because it is an issue. It's not an issue, but it is an important thing that I think we may want to discuss further. But when the charter was finally, the draft charter was given to us, and then the charter was discussed and finally signed up on the last day.
Le quemaron la mancha que tenía allí. ¿No?
Sorry.
La veo más clara.
Christine, just wonder if you might be able to turn your audio off, please.
Perhaps you could mute it for me, because I can't find the mute button.
Okie dokie. Yeah, can do that. There you go.
All right. So a notable concern was the lack of any mention of contraception in the charter. And our possible reason for this is that there are 55% Protestants in Africa, and the Protestants are not totally against contraception. In fact, are generally accepting, apart from some groups, whereas Catholics overall, by dogma, are against contraception. Although that's discussable in the West. But the thing about contraception, and you probably know this, but it is a very insidious, very insidious chemical, and it's accepted as just a morning pill. But in fact, it actually affects the brain circuits and changes it in very subtle ways. And it's not only those people, the women who are taking the contraceptives, the whole society begins to get affected in subtle ways. And you can see these two it was just by chance really that I took this poster to the meeting, and we had it laid out on a table, but it shows 2 graphs here. The one on the left is divorce
Can't see them
rate and oral contraceptive use, showing that about 10 years after contraceptives go up, divorce starts to go up. And
it's not coming up, Father. The graph isn't coming up.
The graph isn't coming up?
No, you need to stop one share and then start another.
We're in the first slide.
Oh, sorry. You're on the first slide. Let's see. I have to stop it and restart it.
You might have to. There might be a cleverer way of doing it, but
let's see. I wonder why that is. So you're seeing a different.
We've seen the first slide.
Yeah, maybe.
So stop share.
Yeah.
And then you start again.
Well, it's not totally critical that you see that. I can just read it to you because it might be beyond my capacity to sort this out, to tell you the truth. But anyway, it was the last point I was going to make. But basically, what has happened in the West, particularly in the United States, that after contraception has started, about 10 years later, abortion took off and divorce. So it gets into the society in a very subtle way. And I think the Africans are certainly doing well to move forward and to try and block a lot of what is unwanted. But if you look at the statistics, but Melinda Gates over the last, since the sort of late 70s or so, has spent $4 billion on India and Africa on contraception and sterilization. $4 billion, a huge amount. And actually, although the fertility rate of Africa is still high at about 4, it has gone down over this period by about 40%, which is a large amount. It stood at about 6.5, and now it's down to 4. So people aren't pressing buttons and alarming. They're saying, oh, well, we've still got a good fertility rate. But the fact is that it's gone down quite tremendously. And if contraception continues, I think you're going to find it very difficult not to follow in the suit of the West. So it is important. So I think those are the only things I wanted to say. It was a lovely meeting. And the last day, the charter was signed, and there was only one abstention from South Africa. But there was very, very upbeat. There were sort of two emotions. One was an anxiety that Africa is being preyed on by the West, and they had to do something urgently because the alarm bells were going off. But at the same time, there was this great optimism and feeling of renewal that was taking them forward. And this was a palpable feeling in the room. And there's a link to Kwame Nkrumah, who was in the 60s, started the whole process of Pan-African unity. And so it's fitting that this meeting took place in Ghana, which was his home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father. Our next panelist is Mr. Richard Kakeeto. He is an advocate of the High Courts of Uganda and Kenya, and very active in bringing together faith leaders, professionals, and parliamentarians to strengthen African culture and moral values. And as such, he was one of the main architects of the emerging African Regional Charter on Family, Sovereignty, and Values we are discussing now. So we are very interested in hearing from Mr. Richard Kakeeto.
Thank you all. On our end, it is good evening, approaching midnight. Augustine Richard Kakeeto, as you said, is my name. My pro-life and pro-family background is related to two incidents in my history. I happened to attempt to pursue the priesthood with the Dominican friars in East Africa before I decided to follow the richer vocation that gives us babies and children. And I also had the opportunity to serve with the Human Life International Kenya. You might be familiar with the American organization, HLI. They had in Kenya a representative, Professor Raphael Wanjohi. And he had made it his business to target universities and colleges with the pro-life message. So I got to interact with this organization while I was a student of philosophy in Nairobi. And then I continued in there. And the professionals, meaning people who ended up joining various disciplines but had been part of HLI, we got involved in the constitutional making process in Kenya, trying to challenge the provisions of the constitution at that time that were anti-life and anti-family, even though the constitution had made very many strides in the area of governance. So that is sort of the background of my work in pro-life and pro-family engagements. So Dr. Wahome was a natural ally and several other people. Then fast forward to 2019. Okay. In 2019, we had something called ICPD 25, meaning 25 years after the International Conference on Population and Development that had taken place in Cairo in 1994. That conference, its 25th anniversary, was coming down to Nairobi. And the pushers of the anti-life and anti-family agenda were using this ICPD 25 to mainstream what is called sexual and reproductive health and rights. So they were pushing sexual rights and pushing the absurdities out of reproductive rights, just like Father Patrick has indicated. So at that time, I had been involved in human rights work in Geneva, helping faith-based organizations to draft stakeholder reports into the human rights process of the UN. Unfortunately, the faith-based organizations that we have at the UN with ECOSOC status are not all aligned on our position. They would love to be fence-sitters and many times tend towards the left. So I had made it a personal mission to infuse any report that I had put my hands on, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, with pro-life recommendations so that states parties whose diplomats have the courage to make pro-life and pro-family recommendations to our countries could do so because these recommendations have been suggested. So in 2019, at the ICPD in Nairobi, a number of us applied to participate in that conference. But 2 months down the road, we were being locked out. It was obvious that the other side is receiving acceptance for participation, but anyone who had a pro-life and pro-family background had not yet received invitations. So what do? We decided to approach the bishop of Nairobi, the Archbishop of Nairobi, and asked him to grant us space in a facility across from the street from where the conference was going to be happening. And my colleagues on the ground didn't seem to understand why I was pushing for it. My colleagues on the ground didn't seem to understand why I was pushing for it because they did not have the background of side events at the UN that I had. But anyway, they supported me. In fact, it is Dr. Wahome and I who made this happen. He was saying, Richard, I'm just trusting you. I don't know what it is you're cooking, but let it happen. So we have this meeting and we ended up being the gathering of all pro-life and pro-family participants that had been denied entry at the ICPD conference. Because someone would send in an application to participate, they profile you, check your social media accounts, check you out, and they realize you're not aligned to their agenda, so they don't give you a confirmation. And that event of ours, which was non-UN, ended up hosting 11 diplomats, including at that time, Valerie Huber, the HHS secretary for the United States at that time during the Trump 1 administration. Okay. Now, that is what opened the eyes of many of our people on the continent that something nefarious was going on.
Can I get a small black with cold milk in there?
So this sexual and reproductive health and rights, Dr. Wahome calls it a religion of sorts.
Sorry, can I just, sorry, excuse me, Richard, just a moment.
Thank you.
Could people put all their microphones off? I'll do it from this end too, just to make sure, but I don't want to put off people who need who need their microphones on.
Okay. So starting with 2019, many of our professionals in Africa had become alert. We began seeing some of the agenda making its way to policy.
I usually that.
Yeah. Iman, could you please take off, put off your microphone?
Sorry, I've done it. Yeah.
So we began seeing a lot of this SRHR. I'm going to keep using this SRHR quite often because it had begun making its way into policy documents in Africa. It had begun making its way into legislative documents on the continent, and we were always firefighting to either stop policies from being promulgated or stopping laws from being legislated every time we had an opportunity. And this pressure is still going on. The beauty about it is that SRHR is non-existent in any of the international core human rights instruments. So you're talking of the 9 human rights documents of the UN, which are negotiated. Because of the strong leadership of the African group and the Organization of Islamic Countries, that language has not been successful in entering the negotiated human rights documents. But that language has made its way into some United Nations resolutions. It has made its way into treaty body interpretations, and it has made a lot of prominence in the special procedures. There are very many cantankerous special rapporteurs. The special rapporteur on religion, for example, the special rapporteur on health, the special rapporteur on education at one point. Okay, so these fellows tend to be largely leftists, and they push these rights in that sense because the UN has been hijacked. So that pushback was always difficult for us because they kept citing these international interpretations, not the international law. So in the year 2021, something important happened, and it was the initialing of the then post-Cotonou Agreement that is now called the Samoa Agreement. I'll give you a little background to this. In 1973, the former colonial powers entered a trade agreement with the former colonies, and former colonies were Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific states. Okay, and the former colonial powers were generally, at that time, it was the European Commission, I think, before it had become the European Union. And this trade agreement was made to promote fair trade as a way of addressing past injustices. Okay, the past colonial injustices. It was always a trade agreement until 1992, when they began introducing governance and democracy conditions within this trade agreement. We will trade with you if your governance structure is like this, or if your democratic practices are acceptable, blah, blah, blah. All right? Now, at the most recent renewal, which was 2021, by initiating, I mean the European Union Commission and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Togo, who had led the negotiation teams on European Union on one side, African, Caribbean, and Pacific states on the other, had initiated it in January of 2021. The draft agreement we had for the now Samoa Agreement had made human rights an essential component of that agreement, and the human rights understanding was SRHR. Because this idea of sexual and reproductive health and rights had become a substantive part of European foreign policy. And because it had become a substantial part of European Union foreign policy, every agreement they would enter would have these kinds of rights as an essential component. So when we came across it, we had it become an issue at the African Bar Association conference in Niger. I'm an advocate practicing in 2 countries, and I've had the opportunity to belong to the African Bar Association. So I worked with the leadership of the African Bar Association, and we examined in the interim the content of the Samoa Agreement. And in the communique of that meeting, we cautioned African heads of state and ministers of foreign affairs to be very cautious about committing to this agreement in the state in which it was. We raised the same issue in 2022 in Malawi. That is again African Bar Association. And later, we accompanied politicians and members of parliament to a joint parliamentary assembly of the European Union and the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states. The members of parliament from African, Caribbean, and Pacific states realized that the European Union was not going to change its position. They were already determined to push it through the way it was. That's when the idea of generating an African regional international law that defines human rights on our terms was born. So, one of the MPs from Malawi suggested that we need a friendly country, and friendly we mean a head of state who can look the EU in their face and tell them off. At that time, we were oscillating between Malawi, because the president there was friendly, he had connected with us well, but then we also had Uganda. So the president in Uganda, being an older man in age, he's generally respected on the continent, and he has the stamina. He's been doing some work for the EU, fighting wars for them and sending troops around the continent. So he has some leverage over the European Union. So he accepts to host us. We played some connections there. Some of the MPs were members of the ruling party in Uganda. They approach State House, and the first conference is hosted in 2023. Now, the first conference, the outcome document of the first conference was what we call the Entebbe Declaration, generally redefining many terms that are corrupted in the human rights discourse, and pointing out the dangers to family, the dangers for children, etc., including castigating pornography, contraception, abortion, all those things. But then the members of parliament realized that this Entebbe conference, in its first kind, has to be an opening to a path to a more serious document. So we then met in Uganda again in 2024 and met in Uganda again in 2025 when we came up with the draft charter on family, sovereignty, and values.
Excellent, okay. Dr. Kakeeto. I think you have very well summarized the background of the new ideological colonialism by the UN and all these international agencies, and the need really to set up a charter on family, sovereignty, and values. Maybe would be the opportunity for Mr. Greg Shea to, who has also participated in this, to elaborate a little more on the charter. Mr. Shea is a Canadian, I think, 25 years of experience in diplomacy and high-tech businesses in Asia, and since the last 10 years also in Africa, where he found in Nairobi Africa Next opportunities to create a brighter future for Africans. He's very active in pro-life and pro-family, social and political work in East Africa, and in this capacity he has helped very much in this building up of the Charter on Family, Sovereignty and Values. Please, Mr. Shea.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and an honor to follow on those wonderful comments and observations of my friend and colleague, Richard. I would mostly want to support and amplify that which he was talking about. My privilege, most of my career in foreign service and thereafter in business was based in Beijing and covering Asia. And I started coming to Africa about 14 years ago. And I spent a fair amount of time in various parts of Africa, but I centered more on Nairobi as that's sort of emerging as the main base for a lot of vectors of interest, not just the UN, well, primarily the UN, but also agencies, foundations, venture capital. There's a lot of offboarding from Johannesburg, which is going through a lot of disruption and difficulties in recent years, and is not a very safe place. So there's a lot of dynamic that's emerging in Nairobi, and also in matters of witness to the faith and developments of the church and developments of policy. It's also become a place where there's a fairly evolving evolution, progression of debate and encounter on societal issues. And as witnessed by the comments of Richard Kakeeto, although Entebbe is where they had the meetings with all the right conditions, and then most recently Ghana, a lot of those that were fueling that initiative were also such as Dr. Wahome with the Catholic Doctors Group of Kenya, and Charles Kanjama, who is active in the Catholic Lawyers as well as in the Kenyan Christian Professional Forum. So a lot of good formative sinews there. Having spent more time then in Kenya in the last 10 years of my time in Africa, had become more involved with Catholic social work and Catholic church activities, which led to encountering these people in their efforts and doing what I could to support them. Part of that journey also was getting more involved in Catholic media. My father had been the head of the Catholic Doctors in Canada and was the principal sort of medical ethical advisor to many different Catholic groups, the Catholic Scholars League and that sort of thing, as well as media groups such as LifeSite News. And so I rekindled some of those relationships, which led to taking on a project to support LifeSite News in Africa. And that now has spread to having a team that is both in Kenya, Uganda, and we have some people in Nigeria. So in that, we also were covering the progress of significant events, such as the conference that Richard helped develop and lead over the last few years. So LifeSite was there for 3 of the 4 conferences. At the same time, we saw the need for a domestic Catholic media project, which has been supported by LifeSite News, and that's Afroviva Media. And we're now developing, we have a studio, we have some team, and we're collaborating with other Catholic media houses to put together some capacity to bring some light to these topics, but also more day-to-day catechesis and basic formation focused on the youth. I would come back to the conference in a second, but why I'm digressing a bit onto the media is the main opportunity and challenge is that which is observed earlier in comments by others here and Father, of the dynamism of the church and the dynamism of the society. The median age in Europe is 45. The median age in sub-Saharan Africa, any guesses? That's an open-ended question. It's less than 45. Would you think it's in the 30s? Hands
22,
up.
I would say.
18.
Okay.
A very good guess, though. Most people guess 35 or 30. 18. So we have a very young population, and within that, the Catholic mirrors pretty much the demographic of the Catholic Church, only surpassed perhaps by the demographic growth of the Muslims, who have even larger families. At the same time, how should I call this? Not as thorough catechesis and formation as might have been the case in previous decades, which we all lived through in the West. That phenomenon is rolling out heavily in Africa as well. So you have a young and boisterous church, but you ask them some very basic things about the real presence in the Eucharist or the lives of the saints, or the what are the four final things. That's one I always try on people who are very active, church leaders and social media for their parishes. Very rarely do I have any of them know what I'm talking about. So there's a massive challenge. The opportunity is, at the same time, there's a lot more ability to affect and influence because there's a huge thirst for learning in that space. And there's not as much practical obstruction from within the church or within the society around it to well-formed Orthodox catechesis, just about the faith itself and also about our faith and morals and our beliefs and why we believe as we do, about the integrity of life from natural conception to natural death. So I'm closing on that because we're focusing more on that now as part of the formula for the best way forward. Yes, definitely engaging in these important block and tackle exercises. I call it to hold the line, like you're having a shield to prevent the slings and arrows from disrupting any further. But then the spear is to advance the cause by building the base through dialogue and engagement, primarily within the Catholic body itself and to a greater extent the Christian dialogue. So we're getting involved in secular events where they talk about gender fluidity in a university context or in a general open context in cities like Nairobi. And we have people like Richard and other well-versed articulators of the Catholic approach engaging. And it's very interesting because they are where we were about 30, 40 years ago. They're really caught up with these ideas that have been spoon-fed to them through NGO-funded education, infiltration and penetration. But they don't hold to it as passionately as perhaps might be the case in the West today. So they're quite interested to hear the perspective of the Catholic perspective, and they'll invite you back for more. So I'll end on that because there's maybe many questions, but I end on that because one of the things we're getting from engagement with those bishops that we do admire for their witness to the truth, as alluded to earlier, in rejecting the same-sex blessings. Those same bishops are increasingly coming under the big brother watch, if you will, of compliance in a more subtle ways than before around synodality in the synodal church. You can feel it advancing. There was a great, defiant stance of a few years ago, and it was very well recognized around the world. But in the meantime, there's a new approach under the new papacy, which is more subtle and less, perhaps, irritating in the strident nature of a few years ago. It's very smooth, and we saw the bishops gathering in East Africa, and we had Cardinal Cherney there mentioning it through that Mass, at least 14 times I could hear the pray for the synodal church, synodality, synodal. And there was very little for the 10,000 gathered, median age 18, again, of the core teachings and beliefs of the church. So the invitation that I had in meeting with one of the better of the bishops prior to that conference, which has just ended yesterday, by the way, was from the Bishop of Kakeeto, Richard, and helped introduce me, and I went to meet him in his diocese, and he had read the position paper which had been prepared by the Academy, and he listened to my presentation on it, and he just emphasized this is a very controversial topic and it's a difficult time, but I do encourage you to engage in the ways that you're talking about, engage with the youth, engage with those who are willing to listen, and move forward in that sort of positive, constructive way. That's probably your best approach to turn the tide, as it were, or to hold the line and then turn the tide in Africa. So I'll hit the pause button there because I put a lot of different ideas.
Very interesting what you say. And recently in the Academy we spread the Cardinal Robert Sarah's statement, precisely pointing the issues that you are mentioning. I think it will be interesting to hear now from one of the oldest fighters, Dr. Wahome, who together with Richard started all this operation. I think that will be interesting to know what is the input of someone who has been in the fight for a long time. Dr. Wahome Ngare is an obstetrician and a gynecologist, founding director of Mercy Health Services, director of Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, and chairman at the Catholic Doctors Association, and is a member of the family board at the Archbishop of Nairobi. So he has also a close contact with the bishops. He can maybe give us some more input about that. Dr. Wahome, you are with the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here. A lot has been said already, and maybe what I'd just like to emphasize is the flow of events. Like Richard was saying, usually international instruments are infiltrated with the language for the sexual and reproductive health and rights. Then they have local organizations that are funded that do two things. One is to advocate through the Ministry of Health, where the money is usually channeled through. And the other one is to advocate through Parliament, where they would get private members' motions that would bring in laws that are not consistent with our values, but are in keeping with those international instruments. And since the government would generally not push such laws, they would look for parliamentarians who would then pick up and take those laws as private members' motions. The last thing that they do is that they use judicial activism, come up with a case, somebody who has a claim, and then they train them and then lodge a matter in court and pursue it slowly until they see whether they can get it to the Supreme Court, where a ruling then is made in their favor. So those are the patterns that we have seen. And because of that, the international meeting of parliamentarians was then a very special area, because we had on 2 or 3 occasions had to go to the East African Court, the East African Court, where they had tried, the Parliament, East African Parliament, where they had tried to push some of those reproductive health bills after we had pushed back in the country. And they would go and push them. in the Legislative Assembly of the East African Community. And if those would pass, then they would be binding to other countries. So the opportunity to go and speak to the parliamentarians across the whole of the East African region and across Africa then ended up being very, very, very good opportunities. And finally, then, other than just talking to them, getting a document that is African, that is international, that has been passed through the parliaments of Africa, would then give us a strong instrument with which to push back against the international sexual and reproductive health and rights movement. We also made it very clear in that document that we are calling out sexual and reproductive health and rights as an ideology. It is not medical practice, it's a social science. And we are exposing it for what it is and calling it by its name in the document and rejecting it. So it's a very powerful instrument, and we shouldn't be surprised by the pushback that we are getting. And we're happy with all the support that we are having from those who are like-minded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wahome. I think we can now pass to the questions, and you may address the question to any one of the panelists. And please just be briefly in introducing yourself and be concise, obviously, in the question, and avoid any ab omnes question, obviously. I think I would give some privilege to those in the Far East, because for them it's very early in the morning, so they need to go to work. And I don't know, maybe to hear first from Rachel Chitilapilli for India, no, on behalf of her father, no, Dr. Joseph Chitilapilli, that unfortunately couldn't attend because he is sick. But Rachel, she is a very brave activist, and she uses all her youth and charm to try to convince the Indian bishops to be more effective in fighting abortion in India. So please, Rachel, present yourself and put your question.
Yes, thank you so much for the very flattering introduction. We actually have the March for Life scheduled next month on the 9th of August in Mumbai, in Chennai, India. And for the first time this year, we're doing a life exhibition for an entire day where we'll cover every topic covered with life issues. So abortion, contraception, IVF, the gender ideology, and chastity, all of these topics. And we're expecting 2,500 students and school and college students, to come participate in the exhibition where we'll teach them how to combat this. So I'm anyway having sleepless nights working on that. So when Dad asked me to volunteer, I was happy to do so. He specifically had three questions, two of which were answered, but the one that wasn't, any of the panelists are welcome to answer. So we have a few missionary sisters who work in Ghana, and they were talking about how polygamy is a major issue in the regions where she works, in the societies she speaks to, in the families she ministers with. And she also spoke about how it's not something that she's seen addressed among the clergy. And she's not sure if it could be because they have family members who struggle with this as well. And so we were wondering, how or if there was a plan to work on polygamy, and what's the situation on ground in Africa, and how will this charter address it? Thank you so much.
Very good question. I don't know who, Richard or Greg or Dr. Wahome, want to pick it.
I defer to Dr. Wahome, he's my senior.
Well, the issue of polygamy is a tough one, especially for communities that are coming to Christ for the first time. That's a step that we've passed in Kenya because we have many families that are Christian in origin, maybe second or third generation now. But in communities where people are coming to Christ for the first time already in polygamous families, that can be quite a tough issue. Now, what I know is that the bishops would usually ask that after counseling the family, then there would be the one woman who would then be married formally in church and receive the sacrament of matrimony. And the man would then not have any sexual relations with the others, but would continue to offer support to them and the families for the rest of the time. So that's how it has been handled, so that the man and the woman he has chosen to receive the sacrament of matrimony with would then receive their sacrament and would be taken into communion. The rest of the family can be baptized and they can come into communion so long as they agree not to have sexual relations, and he would remain the father figure and continue taking care of his children and the other wives. So that's how it has been handled here. I'm not sure whether there is a generally agreed way of doing it in Ghana, or whether they've had any experiences. I would not know what they're doing in Ghana, but that's how it has been handled here before.
Thank you, Doctor. Rachel, you said you have the second question. If it's a quick question, you may put it.
It was just it's a very tiny question. We were wondering how the conference aims to tackle South Africa, which we assume will be very against everything that the Charter proposes. So, how do you bring about that unity with South Africa posing the challenge?
Okay, that one I can handle. Yes, South Africa raised an objection. It was not surprising. South Africa has always maintained that position. They look at the Charter as an anti-rights document. So how are we going to handle South Africa? We are building momentum with other parliaments, and we are headed to the African Union Summit. What happened is that the sign up on the document had the Conference of Speakers and the presidents of African legislatures adopt the processes that have hitherto happened. It is these speakers gathering that is going to forward the Charter to the heads of state in February next year. What will happen is that it will be sponsored by one of the heads of state, probably Ghana or probably Uganda, and then an African Union vote will be done. I know that South Africa might choose to continuously object to it, but the way the legislative processes happen is that the Charter is voted on at the AU Summit, it is adopted and then set up for signature. This is the parliamentary signature. And as soon as it attains 15 signatures, it becomes operational. So within the Charter itself, we've crafted it in such a way that it will become operational after 15 signatures. And then we can follow up with the ratifications, etc. But this Charter is a unique one. Usually charters start from the technical level downwards to Parliament. Now, this Charter started from parliaments going upwards. So what will happen actually, as soon as it gets any signature, it will necessarily become policy in the countries where it is coming from long before it is formally ratified. This is the same technique that EU has been using. It is more interested in signatures, not ratifications. And we are just using the same tools against them. So we proceed. Excellent.
Maybe Dr. Claude Newbury can say something about how the reaction in South Africa is Dr. Claude Newbury is my best friend in 3 years I spent in Johannesburg. Dr. Newbury, you have something to say about? You have to turn on your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Ureta. Lovely to see you. And
yes.
Mr. Ward, Dr. Ward. South Africa is in a terrible situation at the moment because you would all be aware that our government has been active in the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of people from other African countries who have come to South Africa as economic migrants. And so there is a tremendous animosity and even murder by South African citizens, native South Africans, of people from our surrounding territories as far north as Uganda, Tanzania, and other countries in Africa, Mozambique. And these people have been left in a terrible position. So I don't think there's very much prospect of our South African government being in harmony with the other governments of Africa. We, as you know, we go it alone, so to speak. We have a very powerful socialist, Marxist ideology in our South African parliament, government. And so from the point of view of unity of African countries, I think we will be an obstacle for a very long time. You would probably also know that we're associated with China, India, Brazil, in an economic forum at the moment, an agreement. And so that binds us to a large degree.
Yeah.
But
and unfortunately, also you have the not good bishops are the only one who disagree with the other African bishops on particularly on the issue of homosexuality. Thank you very much, Dr. Newbury, about that. Mary Claire Menny from Australia, do you have some question to put maybe to the panel?
Yes. Chris does.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate. It's been very illuminating, and I particularly was interested in the comments around polygamy, because there is a push in the West now for polygamy, and yet we've had that situation in Africa for a long time. So how that's being handled pastorally there is important. And we've mentioned some of the figures in relation to how much money is being poured into contraceptive programs in Africa. I just wondered whether the funding from the West is still a problem in terms of how foreign aid is tied and certain expectations are attached to foreign money coming into African countries. I'm not sure who would be best placed to answer that, but I would be interested to know.
Maybe Greg can say something about?
Yeah, I'll just say in general, my observation is that there's a very high priority, as Richard had mentioned, from the EU in the case that he was talking about, but also from other Western funded organizations, either their own aid development programs or those that they fund unilaterally or multilaterally through the UN agencies to storm the field and to invade the institutions and to make conditional monies for anything to do scholarships or programs or curricula that promotes that agenda. It's like a full court press. It's very noticeable in where the UN system is very highly developed in Nairobi, but it really is across the board. And I'd turn to Richard for more comments.
Yeah, everywhere we have UN agencies, they target specific departments of government. So UNFPA will be in the planning department, UNICEF will target the children's department, WHO targets the Ministry of Health, and that's how the cycle. UNESCO targets the Ministry of Education, and they are all speaking the same language. Now, when America withdrew funding from such programs via USAID, when they locked it down, that money was not necessarily directed to the good programs that we would have, say, the FEM, for example, education, fertility education management, and whatever. Dr. Wahome could talk about that, and the natural family planning and all these things. They didn't receive that money. But the pushers of this agenda got money increased from the EU itself and specific European countries. So actually their funding went up just from a different angle, and while our pro-life and pro-family programs remain starved. So is funding still a problem? Yes, it is a problem. Our adversaries have loads and loads of money available to them from European Union and specific European countries. Thank you.
Well, since the Europeans are seem the very bad element here, maybe a voice from America could give us some more hope that we will have some help from governments for a different policy. Maybe Mr. Stephen Mosher can say something about or ask something.
Yes. Well, let me begin by saying that I am still celebrating the fact that USAID, which has done so many evil things over the decades, has now been dissolved completely. It was the dissolution was effective in July of 2025. It took about a year to accomplish because it was a huge agency. Its remaining functions have been absorbed into the State Department, but they've been sharply reduced. And when I say sharply reduced, they've gone from 6,200 programs down to about 5,200. So over 5,000 programs have been terminated. The money spent has gone from 43 billion down, I think so far in 2026, 7 billion has been allocated. The Congress continues to want to fund USAID and has appropriated $50 billion, but that money is not being spent. And it's interesting that, of course, the UN Population Fund has been cut off, and that the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, as of course you've probably heard, has said that the administration will not again appropriate funds for family planning, reproductive health activities. And about 85% of the projects, including family planning, reproductive health, have been terminated. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said, quote, "The U.S. is not going to fund this, and the U.S. will not distribute contraceptives internationally." He said, and I quote, "The U.S. is not going to fund them. They're not going to use them." And we even destroyed $10 million worth of contraceptives that were left in a Belgian warehouse. They were taken to a disposal site and all incinerated. And so we have, the administration is putting in zero budgetary requests for bilateral family planning funding. They're putting in zero budgetary requests for UNFPA support.
Dr. Newbury seems to have some bad news.
Yes, Mr. Ureta and gentlemen, ladies, funds don't only come directly from governments. Funds are channeled via other organizations. For example, through International Planned Parenthood. I know that some of their funds have been cut off. And organizations such as the Marie Stopes organization, by British Overseas Development Programs, by the World Bank, by the International Monetary Fund. And so there are many channels to divert funds apart from, for example, the tremendously good beneficial effect of President Trump cutting off funding from US aid. But the fund still goes on. The funding still goes on. And these organizations, they are progressively aggressive in their advertisement of anti-life programs. For example, in the streets of Johannesburg, every stop sign is covered with placards advertising abortion. And authorities like, for example, the City Council of Johannesburg which forbids organizations to put advertisements up on things like stop signs, they do nothing to remove them. So there is a tremendous governmental collusion to promote abortion and other nefarious things, on the point now of another great push forward for euthanasia. As you know, South Africa is in the forefront of the normalization of polygamy. And so we're in
we need to put a lot of strength in stopping the funding of these organizations. That you are very right. Mr. Paul Byrne has a question for Father Patrick. Could you please present it? And present yourself.
Yes. Hello to all of you.
Hello.
Father Patrick mentioned that there are subtle ways that contraception is affecting society. Perhaps he'll tell us those subtle ways and where that information comes from.
Well, there are several pathways in the brain that are affected, but particularly the reward system in the brain has been found to be affected. Now, a lot of this research is not pushed, but you can find research, and definitely the reward system is a central problem. But I think it's not only just the brain circuits; it's also a societal. It's also a societal effect. By the slowly changes society by changing sexual morality, and it just feeds into the society in that way. But it is both brain and societal. It's multi-level. It's very powerful, and it's mostly with the hormonal contraceptives, obviously. But when you reach a certain point in the society, a certain percentage, it is very difficult to get out of it.
Thank you, Father. Greg has something to say or to ask?
Go ahead. Yeah, it is Richard who is putting up the hand. Following up from Stephen Mosher. By the way, I would like to tell all of you that amongst all of you, the first person whose writings I read was Stephen Mosher. I was still a student. I think it was Population Research International or something. And he was coming heavy on the UNFPA programs in China. So thank you for radicalizing me at that age. I think I was 24, 25. Anyway, so yeah, Stephen, there is currently a number of calls from the State Department through the embassies that is calling for statements of interest on selected African countries. But we are finding a challenge as pro-life and pro-family organizations to compete, partly because we have not been competing for American grants before, so our capacity is terribly limited on how to compete for these grants. Secondly, because the crafting of the call for statements of interest does not necessarily point us into the work we are already doing. Meaning, people look at the statement, the call, and they say, we cannot add any value to this thing because of the nature of work we do. Many pro-life and pro-family organizations have been involved in working with youth, probably promoting natural family planning or challenging policy advocacy, stuff like that. Now, none of the call for statements of interest that I've seen would excite or would be aligned with what we are already doing. What am I praying for? I'm praying for whoever is drafting these calls for statements of interest to figure out how to plug our interests in there so that we join the queue for the soup. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Richard. We have a lot of European bashing here, but we have someone from Eastern Europe that may have some interest comments to say or a question to ask. Mr. Ivan Poljakovic, could you please present yourself and say
thank
something?
you. Well, that's Central Europe. We consider Croatia in part of Central Europe.
Central Europe, yes.
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that contraception has not been mentioned in the Charter. And that's because contraception is the cornerstone of this new ideology, as Father Patrick mentioned. Once you give in to contraception, then the whole mentality changes in time and the society changes, as Father Patrick mentioned. So I think maybe in future negotiations and meetings, this issue should be pressed on to get, a due attention. So my question is, has any of the bishops or Catholics or laity or priests talked about it? And if it was refused, on what grounds was it refused to get this into the Charter? Because, as I said, and we all know, it's crucial. Once you give into contraception, then of course, the next thing is abortion. It means free sex. Then, gay marriages come, and all this, new ideology comes in. So it's like an opening gate. You open yourself to contraception, you open to all these ghastly things. So my question is whether some of the bishops or Catholic representatives talked about it, and on what grounds was it refused to get into Charter, because it's so important.
Who wants to pick the question? If not, Dr. Newbury has something to say after.
Okay, I'll speak as one of the draftspersons of the Charter. We usually get into a difficult situation when we are attempting to draft a secular document. Okay, the anti-contraception position has tended to be labeled a Catholic position. Okay, we have not yet won over common thinking on this question from every other kind of religion or whatever. So when you over insist on the contraception, you tend to be seen as pushing a Catholic position in a secular document. But that is not all lost. Because contraception has been packaged as health care within the context of sexual and reproductive health and rights, by criticizing and targeting sexual and reproductive health and rights as a danger to Africa, we have created the framework from which contraception can be fought.
Excellent.
The second issue is that our opponents have generated, they stand on something called evidence-based advocacy. The academy here might do well to invest in some sort of research and evidence that is contemporary, so that we use it in advocacy and policy briefs, especially if it points out the consistent connection between contraception and the adversity that women are suffering in various things. Because we used to have the abortion breast cancer link, we used to have contraception and some kinds of cancers. We need to proliferate this kind of research in academic institutions and researchers, so that a body of knowledge is generated that we can then use in advocacy. That's what I could say for now.
Excellent. Dr. Newbury.
Mr. Uretti, if I could just appeal to all the members for the clarification of the words we use in the struggle for life. We use the word contraceptives, when in fact what we are talking about is birth elimination, it's population control, and we should not use the word contraceptive for any of these things other than those agents which are actually contraceptive. The pill has an abortive effect. The injection has an abortive effect. The IUD has an abortive effect. All of the modern mechanisms have abortive effects. The immunization against pregnancy is based on abortion. So we should clarify our language to talk about abortion or abortive contraception if you want to use the word contraception. But the aim is really to prevent population growth. It's population control. And so we give a verbal advantage to those we talk to when we discuss contraception. They say, well, what's wrong with preventing conception? And the church itself promotes natural fertility control. These are the things we should be very careful of, I think. We should make it absolutely clear that we're talking about the murder of unborn children.
Excellent. Maybe Greg, who is a media specialist, can say something about that. Greg, are you there?
Yes, I'm back. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. My father used to say the same in his circles with the doctors and the philosophers and all. The meanings of words is very important. You use seeding ground unnecessarily. It's like we did with the gay movement. What does it mean to be gay? Well, I'm old enough to remember that we had a gay old time. Now we can't use that anymore. And so, yes, these are abortive fashions is the term that he used to use. That's clearly what they are. Maybe not a condom, but the pills and all their variety. And at the other point that I picked up was, what's wrong with conception? Yeah, so turn it on its head, turn it around. And again, in that area of engagement through youth media, there are young advocates when they're properly trained, and they can bring the passion of their faith through well-formed teaching to be quite compelling. And then when you build up the base, the politicians then have to take notice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I see that we have Orlando Villalobos. Maybe he has some comments, interesting comments to make or questions to put.
No, well, I've not. Good evening, everybody. But I at the moment I don't have. I'm learning a lot, but I don't have any comments right on at the moment. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Well, Mrs. Vollmer, I'm being asked to ask you to share the research on water pollution.
Yes, I was just answering that my knowledge comes through the British press, because interestingly, the British have abandoned all moral strictures to such a degree that they're willing to allow the press to talk about all kinds of stuff. Even I've seen back in the past, I've seen high headlines about the pill causing cancer. And now the most recent thing I've seen, not too recent, but there is a problem of estrogen in the groundwater. So I was just about to look it up on the AI, because there I'm sure it would turn up. I don't have it myself because I'm not a researcher. I'm a propagandist, as you all know.
But
I like people to know what's being said.
That's something had to be studied further. I don't know. Well, we have already 1 hour and a half of this Conversazione, one of the most enlightening and interesting ones. And unless someone has another question to put to one of the panelists.
I believe Mr. Nobrega is on from South America. I don't know if he has
well, I asked Orlando, but he reacted, yes. But Tadeu Nobrega was for a while, but he is not anymore.
Right, okay.
I would like to ask a question.
Yes,
would it be helpful in any way to Africa? We're helping Africa with our program. We're now getting close to 200,000 students in 16 countries with this program, which is to help them to understand, Christian life and living. But I was wondering whether it would be helpful at all to get Latin American backing in this particular effort that you're doing with this Congress.
Well, particularly if Brazil is part of the BRICS, in Latin America could do the counteraction at least. I don't know.
I'm not in Brazil, unfortunately. And Venezuela, as you may know, has its problems at the time.
Yes. Very good. Then in that case, I think we can close, and maybe Father Pullicino could close with a prayer to Saint Michael. But in that case, Mrs. Lennon had to put the prayer maybe for all us to follow.
I haven't got it to hand.
Oh, no. So what we know by heart.
Yeah. You should do.
Each one says in his own language.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Michael, the Archangel, defend us in the day of battle. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all the evil spirits who wander through the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
Amen.
Immaculate
Well, now I've concluded my mission. I pass the chair to Dr. Ward once again to the final illuminating and encouraging words.
When we tried to design this particular Conversazione, I was full of hope and optimism, and I'm certain this has been totally confirmed. I think that Africa brings such vitality to us all, and certainly we are seeing the great light from Africa. But it's not just Africa, because in fact, when others in the West among you have been speaking, that also brings vast encouragement. And I think what we have to have is a synergy between us, amongst us all, the West, the real West, not the neo-West, but the real West, and Africa. But I think it is Africa that's going to bring us a great deal of hope. On practical points, if you have particular projects that you would like us to address, send them to our executive secretary. We now have a team of people. We are trying to build up a team of experts who can address particular issues. But I think above all, certainly not all is lost. Far, far from it. But the problem is fundamentally a spiritual problem. And I would ask you all, and the vast majority of you are members of the Academy. I think that the only one who isn't is Richard. And I would think that by acclamation, we could bring him on board, because Richard's talk was absolutely fantastic. But if you all support Richard, I'll bring it to the board that you all second him. I certainly would. I would love to propose him. So thank you very much for everything you've done. Pray for the Academy. It's a very small body. We are a very small group of people. But by golly, we have reason. I was in the Pontifical Academy for life for almost 10 years. Our Academy is hugely more dynamic. So let's keep going. Let's work together and give one another moral support. Thank you very much. Good night. God bless you.
Good night.
Just thank you also for people who stayed up late at night, especially Richard and and
Dr.
Greg,
Wahome.
and those who, at the other end of the scale, got up at a very unchristian hour in Australia and India. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks, good everybody.
Night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Ciao, ciao.